So beginning the recording. So let me do this real quick. Great. So welcome and thanks for attending today. I'm Melinda Kelly and I'm a grant manager with the Department of Conservation. I'm joined today by Tim Bryant and many other members of our conservation team today. We've allowed an hour for the workshop. The presentation should last about 40 minutes or so, and then we want to provide plenty of time at the end for questions. The presentation slides and recording, as I mentioned, will be emailed out probably in the next day or two, probably early next week, given the holiday. If you have any technical issues, just let us know through the chat, and we're happy to assist you. And also, we'll be referring to the CFCP guidelines and solicitation package throughout this webinar. So if you can please have these documents handy for reference. We're assuming that you have some knowledge of these materials as we're going through the webinar. So let me just drop that into the chat real quick. The link to those if you don't have that already. Please hold. There we go. Great. So just want to review the agenda real quick. Today's presentation is made up of a few different parts. We'll provide an overview of the CFCP program, including recent legislative changes, as well as changes to the program and the solicitation. Then we'll dive into project eligibility, pre-proposals and applications and timing, and then again, leaving time at the end for questions. As will be discussed, there's two types of projects that are eligible for these grants: agricultural conservation easements and land improvement projects. And we'll be discussing those in more detail. So the California Farmland Conservancy Program is a statewide grant program that supports local efforts to establish agricultural conservation easements and land improvement projects for the purpose of conserving important agricultural land resources and enhancing sustainable agricultural uses. CFCP was created by the California Farmland Conservancy Program Act of 1995. Since its inception, CFCP has completed more than 184 agricultural conservation easements on almost 60,000 acres of strategically important farmland. The funding for this program has come from a variety of sources, including the General Fund, Environmental License Plate Fund, the Soil Conservation Fund, and proceeds from various propositions. This latest CFCP solicitation, currently has approximately $4.9 million available for funding. So the 2023 legislative update, wanted to go into that in a little bit of detail here. Assembly Bill 2964 made significant changes to the CFCP statute. Those changes will take effect on January 1st, 2023, and have been incorporated into this 2022 solicitation. So notable changes include broadening the definition of applicant to include California Native tribes. It eliminated the minimum and maximum funding allowances for land improvement and planning grants. It eliminated the requirement that the applicable local government pass a resolution of support for the proposed project, and replaced it with a new requirement that a notification letter be sent to the applicable planning director. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later in the presentation. It loosened up the prohibition against restrictions on husbandry practices by including an extensive list of activities that are deemed consistent and compatible with husbandry practices. Some examples of these include restoration, enhancement, maintenance, protection, and conservation of natural resources, activities to reduce the ag's operation emissions of GHG, and improve, promote, enhance the land's adaptation and resilience to climate change, activities to support water conservation and protection, improve air quality, fuels reduction, and management. Also construction of renewable energy facilities for the ag operation. It also broadened the scope of potential land improvement projects by eliminating the requirement that such projects must benefit a CFCP-funded easements, and instead requiring that they occur on land protected by a conservation easement. So broadened the opportunity there for different properties or a similar long-term conservation agreement. Additionally, it eliminated the 25-year administrative termination provision. Also of note, DOC has initiated the process of revising the CFCP regulations to remove the requirement that a completed appraisal accompany the grant application. This pending change to the regulations has been incorporated into the 2022 solicitation. So also, and additionally, and new to this particular, the 2022 CFCP solicitation, is that all easement projects approved for funding are also eligible to receive up to $60,000 in addition to the funding towards the acquisition cost, and also the management carbon farm plans costs. So up to $10,000 is available to cover the cost of developing a management plan or carbon plan. Also, this round, the readiness ranking from SALC will be used in the 2022 solicitation, so this is also new, and also providing letters to county and or city planning directors is also new to the CFCP. And as I mentioned, we will be discussing that more in detail later in the webinar. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tim to discuss program goals and project eligibility.
Thank you, and good morning. I'm just going to touch on a few of the program goals here for CFCP, and some of these goals also come from the two funding sources, so Prop 40 and Prop 68, and they include things such as encouraging voluntary and long-term private stewardship of agricultural lands, protecting farm and ranching operations in ag areas from non-agricultural uses, encouraging long-term conservation of productive ag lands in order to protect the ag economy of rural communities, as well as state and future generations of Californians, support access to land for socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, encouraging local land use planning for orderly and efficient urban growth and conservation of ag lands. And on the next slide, there's a few more I'll touch on, encouraging local land use planning decisions that are consistent with state policies, encouraging improvements to enhance the sustainability of long-term ag use, promoting land stewardship practices that result in clean air, water, carbon sequestration, and healthy natural ecosystems, and support climate adaptation and resilience via agricultural land conservation. So again, these are goals that come from both CFCP statutes and the funding sources. And as Melinda touched on earlier, there's two eligible projects being offered this solicitation. We have, again, the projects to fund the purchase of agricultural conservation easements, and projects to and grants to fund improvements of lands protected by conservation easements or similar long-term agreements. And so those are the two offerings this particular round. The examples of land improvement projects could include things like weed abatement, erosion buffer strips in riparian areas, sediment retention ponds, hedgerows, cover crops, things of that sort. And to be eligible for funding, land improvement projects must satisfy at least one of the land improvement program goals that are specified on page 6 of the solicitation. These relate to Proposition 68, and they include things like enhancing the ag value and promotion of long-term sustainable agricultural use of the protected property, increasing the compatibility of agricultural operations near sensitive natural areas, demonstrating new and innovative best management practices that have potential for wide application, restoration or enhancement of resources on the land. So those are a few of those land improvement goals specified on page 6. And in addition, when it comes to the land improvement component, page 12 of the solicitation, you'll see there's additional eligibility criteria, including things like CEQA compliance and certifying or satisfying certain requirements relating to Prop 68. So you'll want to look at those as well. The eligibility criteria for easements are more extensive. You you can find those on page 11 and 12 of the solicitation, and they are different than the criteria for land improvement. So those criteria originate from both the CFCP statute and the funding sources. So there's quite a few there. It would please familiarize yourselves with those and consider them against your proposed projects, and definitely contact us if you have any questions about that. And here, so the in terms of eligible applicants, we have them listed here, essentially local governments, nonprofits, and tribes. So here you can read, kind of get into the specifics a bit more, but those generally would be the three categories of eligible applicants for CFCP grant funding. And again, contact us if you have questions about your organization's eligibility. We can help you out. Okay, so the process. So those of you that have applied to some of our other conservation easement programs, like our Sustainable Agricultural Land Conservation Program, will be familiar with this approach. So we have a mandatory pre-proposal process followed by the full-fledged grant application process. So at the pre-proposal stage, we're looking at reviewing basic project features to kind of issue spot, look for anything, any areas of concern. It's primarily also an eligibility review and determination. So before our partners can go to the effort of putting together a full application, we want to make sure that their proposal is indeed eligible. And so that's what we'll really take a close look at. And it's what a lot of the narrative questions in that pre-proposal relate to, kind of gathering that information. And so we can take a look at your, the eligibility requirements, and we'll do an initial title review. Again, issue spotting, making sure, if there's any concerns, we can convey them to you, and readiness, in terms of kind of whether the project is one that could be hit the ground running and be completed within our typical 2-year time frame, or if it needs a little bit more time to develop before we want to see a full application come in. And then for the applications, kind of dialing in the project structure, reviewing title as needed, readiness review, and then really just this is where we score and evaluate and rank the applications for funding. So that's kind of what a lot of the narrative questions there in the application relate to the selection criteria, and gathering information to help us score those applications. And yeah, the selection criteria are found on page 12 through 15 of the solicitation. So if you have an eligible project, the next question will be, well, do you feel like it'd be kind of a competitive project? And so you can take a look at those selection criteria to see kind of how your project might fare in terms of those criteria. So now we're going to look more closely at the pre-proposal process. Again, these are required, and they are due November 25th. And so we'll look a little bit more closely at the submittal requirements and our feedback. So here's the checklist. So this is straight from the pre-proposal documents. So there's a pre-proposal form for easements, and there's a separate pre-proposal form for land improvements. So you'll want to use the right one. And they have different components, which are listed here. All those components need to be included. So definitely use this checklist to make sure everything's in your pre-proposal submittal. And here, equity. So equity relates to both easements and the land improvement projects. A lot of this language comes from Prop 68. So we, which encourages applicants where possible to identify strategies to address the needs of severely disadvantaged communities, which there's a definition. I don't see it's not on the slide, some of my talking points. And the Public Resources Code has a definition of severely disadvantaged communities and has a definition of disadvantaged communities. And we, for socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, we look to the Food and Agricultural Code, Section 512. So here you can see that we intend to, where possible, allocate at least 15% of our available funding to serve for grants that serve severely disadvantaged communities. And so that would include projects serving severely disadvantaged communities and those that are either being located within or within a mile of a severely disadvantaged community. And projects funded through that serve severely disadvantaged communities may be eligible up to 25% to receive a 25% advance payment to initiate that project in a timely manner. And projects that demonstratively serve a disadvantaged community or severely disadvantaged community can also receive additional scoring points, which you'll see in that selection criteria. There's a specific criterion for disadvantaged community benefits, and so the additional points can be garnered if you can show in your application that your project is indeed serving one of either a severely disadvantaged or a disadvantaged community. And we will use, there's a California State Parks has what's called the Community Fact Finder tool, which is what we will be using, and you should be using as well and Melinda's dropping a link into the chat there to determine your project's proximity to a severely disadvantaged community. So you can contact us if you have any issues using that tool. We're happy to help. Yeah, the next slide shows, this is a snapshot of that tool. So you can drop a pin at a location, you can put in an address. You can see there's a box that you want to check there that says disadvantaged community, and then it will bring up those layers, and it will show for your particular property where it is in relation to either a disadvantaged or severely disadvantaged community. And to receive those selection criteria points, you'll need to describe how the project serves or benefits one of those two types of communities. And so so that would be at the most likely at the application stage. You detail that information, but we're happy to help at any time to kind of help you understand if that's something that you might want to shoot for, or if you feel like your project's not doesn't satisfy. If it's not either within or within a mile, then you may not be eligible for those points. Okay. All right, so pre-proposal review process. I think I touched on this a little bit. Again, looking for, make sure you got a complete application. We're going to look closely at eligibility and readiness. We'll look at the project structure and see if there's any, if we have any concerns of how you're kind of pitching the project to us. And we'll take a look at the title report to see if there's anything there notable that needs to be addressed or explained at the application stage. And we'll reach out to you if we have any questions or if there's any missing documents. We're going to prepare a staff review, a summary review sheet. We'll note any issues, any missing information, and kind of a initial readiness determination and eligibility determination. We'll provide you with that feedback, and to hopefully help with your application process. We do typically include and hope that you would consider our feedback, and if we have questions, that those would be addressed at the application stage. If they don't get addressed at the application stage, it could hurt your readiness, your readiness ranking. So you'll want to take a close look at the feedback, and hopefully it's beneficial. Let's see. Yeah, if your project is deemed, your pre-proposal might be deemed eligible with conditions. So at the application stage, that's, those conditions you might want to zero in on and respond to. That way there's no concerns going forward once we get your application. Okay, and then here, so wanted to highlight a few things here in terms of the easement component of the project. There is a, and I want to provide some context about the sort of projects that kind of we hope to see. In a nutshell, like any commercial agricultural land threatened by conversion to non-ag uses would likely be eligible. And CFCP defines ag land as being either prime farmland, statewide importance, unique, local, or grazing land. And these are all definitions taken from our farmland mapping and monitoring program. So it would need to meet one of those categories. If it does not meet one of those categories because that area is not mapped by our FMMP program, then statute requires that you use the definition from the Williamson Act program of prime agricultural land. So that could still get you in the door if you're not mapped yet by our FMMP program. And again, happy to help. If you have any clarification or concerns, you could give us a call. Title report. Hopefully you'll be able to get a title report in time. If not, feel free to contact us. We know we have a fairly condensed time frame with this proposal, and that relates to our need to encumber these Proposition 40 and Proposition 68 funds, most likely before the end of the fiscal year. So it's a bit of a condensed time frame, but we do require a title report that's less than 12 months old. We'll take an initial look, like I said, at the pre-proposal stage and kind of issue spot there. Hopefully the title report includes links to all the underlying documents. That if not, then we may need separate those submitted separately. And we'll work with you to determine if there's any title issues that need to be addressed at the application stage, or title issues that more long-term would need to be addressed before the close of escrow. And see, so some typical concerns we might flag might relate to separated mineral rights, lack of legal access, other third-party interests, or any ownership uncertainty. Those are kind of common issues that we would look for. And title concerns that can only be addressed through subordination would include things like leases and deeds of trust. And eventually we would need to take a look at all those, look at those documents. But that would be prior to close of escrow. And plotted easements map is helpful too if you're able to get a copy of that for your either proposal or application submittal. Applicant landowner letter of intent. So this is similar to our other SALC program. I wanted to mention this one because it's with our other programs, it's a requirement that often gets flubbed a bit. So we do require that all owners on title must sign. So not just what you feel like is the representative or the spokesperson, or we do need you look to the we're going to look to the title report and see who the owners are, and we need to have all of them sign this letter of intent. That's just to cover our bases, to make sure that everyone's on board going forward. We do have a sample letter on our website that you can utilize if that's helpful, but the letter also must contain these 4 items which I've noted there. So again, make sure you get all the owners to sign, and then make sure that it addresses these 4 items. If either of those 2 are missing, then we would most likely need you to go back and get a revised letter and resubmit that. So hopefully you can get that right the first time. And home stretch here. How to submit your proposal. So they're due November 25, and you can no later than November 25th. And you would submit them to the email address shown here, the CFCP email address. And again, don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. And my last slide for the moment here. So site visits, these will most likely be held probably only for the easement component. We may do it for land improvement, and that we'll just see what comes our way. But those site visits would occur either virtually or in person sometime after the pre-proposal is submitted, but no later than when we make awards. So we'll see again what the timing, what works out best for you, what works out best for us in terms of when to schedule those site visits. And see, and lastly, it says here, please put a plan in terms of preparing the application. Just be aware that we realize it's a tight turnaround. So once you get our feedback, hopefully you can get to work on the application in a timely manner. And I think that is it for me. And Melinda's going to talk about the application component, so I will hand it back.
Super, thanks, Tim. Great job. So perfect. So let me start off. We're going to, again, the applications are due on January 6th, and we'll talk a little bit about the submittal requirements and the post-application. So similar to the pre-proposals, you'll see within the guidelines and with the application packet that there's a checklist for both the easements and also for the land improvement. So again, same sort of checklist. You want to make sure that you're including this with your application, and also that you're including all these items. There are a couple additional components that are not required, but if they're applicable, we'd want you to include those as well. So that should be pretty straightforward. So one of the things, and this is a new component, and as I mentioned, we would talk about it a little bit more. So this is one of the things that's now required is a letter to the planning director. It's a signed and dated letter to the local planning director or directors, and it needs to be included within your application. This is a new CFCP requirement. Statute requires that the letter be provided to the relevant county or counties. There are those occasions when a project may be in 2 counties, and in addition to that, every city within 2 miles of the property. And that a 30-day comment period be provided following the application deadline. This is just for the easement grant applications only. It doesn't apply to the land improvement portion. So this replaces, just to note, this replaces our previous public notification requirements. So applicants no longer have to do the neighboring landowner notifications or obtain a resolution from their county board of supervisors. As I'll mention later, you still need a resolution from the board for the organization that's applying, but not the county board of supervisors. So similar to the landowner letter, you want to make sure that you're very specifically including the bullets that are noted here within that letter. The applicants intend to apply for a grant to acquire an agricultural conservation easement, the deadline, and a statement that the conservation easement may result in reduced property tax revenue, and the jurisdiction's right to submit comments to the department within 30 days of the application deadline, and then also include in that the DOC's contact information if they want to provide written comments. A sample letter is posted on the CFCP website, which I popped a link in earlier. So you can just use that sample if you like, or use it as a guideline. The letter, incidentally, this letter was updated within just last week, I think. So please make sure that if you downloaded one earlier, that you go back and get the newer one. And then this is the application resolution of support. So this is required, the applicant is also required to submit a signed resolution of support from its board of directors. So, or similar governing body authorizing the submittal of a grant application to CFCP. And as I mentioned, this is different from the County Board of Supervisors resolution of support, which is no longer needed. This is for the body authorizing the resolution of support from your board of directors. The resolution should be submitted by the application deadline. However, we understand sometimes boards don't meet in a timely fashion. So if it doesn't have a meeting scheduled between now and the application deadline, an extension may be granted. Just let us know. However, the resolution must be submitted as soon as feasible following the application deadline, and certainly no later than when awards are approved. If you require this extension, just reach out to your reviewer as soon as possible to discuss. And again, the resolution must include the items noted on the slide, and all this information is clearly outlined within the guidelines and within the application process package. So I don't need to go into those details. For the work plan, the additional item that would be needed for land improvement projects would be applicants must provide a detailed work plan that specifies the activities and sub-activities that will be performed during the grant term. The work plan will also include a schedule of target completion dates, performance measures, and a list of deliverables to be provided as proof of project completion. Now I'll talk a little bit about the application submittal and next steps. So in this section, we'll discuss how to submit your application, what to expect after the application has been received, and then when the awards will be announced or expected to be announced. So here's kind of a good little flow chart of what the timing is. Projects, pre-proposals are due November 25th, and they are required. During December, we'll be providing feedback to the applicants, and they'll be informed of eligibility determinations. And then January 6th, applications for eligible projects are due. And then in February, early February, hopefully, awards will be recommended for approval by the director. And then March 2023, grantees will enter into grant agreement with DOC. As Tim mentioned earlier, the encumbrance on these proposition funds is such that we need to get grantees into grant agreement probably by no later than March. So similar to the pre-proposal submittal, please send in your application packet to the cfcp@conservation.ca.gov email. All that's on the website. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to call or contact DOC. And we're, especially if you're having trouble sending the application due to file size or other issues. So, and again, please note that the applications are due on January 6th. And then so once the applications are received, CFCP staff will review the applications. The projects and selection scoring will be presented to the director of the department, who will then consider the comments and recommendations of the reviewers and make the final funding decision. The director of the department will make the final determination as to which projects are going to be approved for award. And in this process, the director may consider some of the following things when making awards: the readiness score, for example, the selection criteria rankings. These are the things that Tim mentioned earlier, and also the extent to which projects meet goals and the goals outlined in the solicitation, the extent to which the project serves severely disadvantaged communities and socially disadvantaged ranchers and farmers. The awards will be announced no later than March 2023. although we said earlier February, so in February or March. And if your project is awarded, we'll be entering into grant agreement in March, as I mentioned. So I think that pretty much covers everything. And as a reminder, we'll be sending a link to the recording and a copy of the presentation slides to everyone who registered for today's workshop, probably early next week. So with that, I think I'll open it up for questions. It looks like we already have some questions in the chat. So why don't I jump into those first? Let me grab my, I know there was one. Let's see. All right, my screen is not wanting to move here. Let's see. So Guru Mantra is asking, mentions that we have nearly 4,000 acres of zoned residential conservation agricultural lands within the city limits. Will any of those parcels 2.5 to 10 acres qualify? Not quite clear on what that project looks like. Maybe we'd need a little more details on that. And what the ownership looks like and all that. So Guru, if you want to come off of chat and maybe Guru Mantra. Okay, well, we can come back to that. The other question is, do purely grazing lands qualify for agricultural conservation easements? And I think based on the definition that Tim mentioned, that would definitely, if it's within the FMMP grazing lands definition or the Williamson Act, right, Tim?
Right, yeah. Yeah, no, grazing land would certainly be eligible. Yeah, like cultivated land, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Can a land improvement project include a new well to support a community garden? I think in this case, Tim, a community garden may not be an eligible project type for a land improvement project to be put on, but.
Right, yeah, the requirement is that the land be protected with the conservation easement or similar conservation agreement. So to me, that stands out as being kind of my first question is that for your project, would that be true?
Right, exactly. Okay, and I know I saw some hands here. Where'd they go? Tim, do you see hands up?
Oh,
oh, they did a second ago. There's one, I see a hand, but I'm not able to. Oh, Benjamin, there we go. Benjamin, go ahead and come off mute.
Yes, yes, I'm here. Thank you so much for providing this webinar. Really appreciate it. I was just curious if the scale of the project, is there a limit on how small the area that is going into conservation and with this program is?
I think what you might run into there is you start getting to dealing with properties that are smaller is viability. I mean, that's something we would consider if we're looking at
I guess the scale, to be just more direct, is we have a 28-acre part of the farm that's part of the it's like borders the production area and the riparian zone and everything that we're looking at incorporating into this. Is that a size that would qualify?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, we would evaluate it against our eligibility criteria, which talk about the include questions like, is the parcel large enough to sustain commercial ag production? You know, does the area support long-term commercial ag? So that would be what we would be.
The field production under like your the prime farmlands, importance in the areas of the state that's been classified as that. It's like we have 15 acres that are classified as that. within that, and we're doing a lot of production. I guess the commercial ag, are those definitions that are in this solicitation application form as far as how they are defined exactly? Because we're doing a lot of different innovative stuff that, kind of goes through a couple of different definitions, so to speak. Just as far as because we're working a lot with the indigenous community there, and we're integrating some of the farming with the wild, and the production per se there's a lot of edges that are being pulled out into that space as well, that are for production, but I don't know if it would fit under your definition of commercial.
Yeah,
just because
sounds like an
interesting
project.
Yeah, it's going. It's in partnership with Post. We, are in relationship with Peninsula Open Space Trust, and we work with the RCD and NRCS and everything. So, it's we have a lot of momentum and different things. I'm just wondering within the definitions of here.
Right. I think what would be great, Ben, is to follow up with us individually, and we can kind of dive into it a little bit more to learn a little bit more about the project.
What's the best follow up with you individually?
Yeah, if you want to just reach out to the CFCP email, we'll follow up with you. I think, it sounds, 40 acres is, we've done small projects. So, I think 40 acres would probably be okay. But as Tim said, just keeping it within the parameters of the guidelines. But let's talk offline about it so we can get into a little more details. How's that sound?
And that email is the cfcp@conservation.ca.gov.
Yep, that would be perfect.
All right, great. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome, Ben. Thanks.
I just wanted to add one last thing. This is Shauna Atherton Bauer. I know my own name, I promise. Which is that in terms of viability for commercial agricultural production, we don't have a statewide definition. We look at that viability at the regional scale based on other commercially viable properties in that area.
Awesome. Thanks, Shauna, for that clarification. So let me I'll come back to you, Kevin, in just a second. Let me get to a few of the questions in the chat. Janaea is asking, for the letter of intent, the estimated value of the easement was discussed with the landowners, that portion of it. How do we do this if the easement has not yet been drafted and no appraisals have been conducted?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would, in discussions with the landowner, hopefully you can get a sense of like what the project structure might look like and the reserved rights and kind of ballpark it. I mean, yeah, you won't have an appraisal, but if you could consider prior projects, maybe you've done prior appraisals that had a similar look and feel maybe of this prospect. That might be one option, or verbally touch base with an appraiser that might be able to give you a ballpark or some sort of preliminary opinion. But that would be I think that's how you would approach it. Hopefully that helps. But we're not expecting you to have everything fine-tuned. It's more of a, kind of based on this concept and based on our experience and past appraisals. This is kind of what we're ballparking.
Great, thanks, Tim. Another question, or Janaea?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, so can we just write that in the narrative? We touched base with this appraiser, we looked at our past, is that kind of acceptable in the pre-application portion as rationale for what we are estimating the value of the easement?
Yeah, there's kind of two things going on. I'd say there's one, like in the application, explaining how you arrived at that easement value. And then the other is in the letter, the landowner letter of intent. I think that gets also at just acknowledging that the value may change, recognizing as you, the applicant, and as the landowner, acknowledging that the value to as at the time that letter gets signed is an estimate that might change. And, no one's going to be caught off guard if it later goes up or down based on the appraisal. So.
Great, thank you.
Great, thanks, Tim. And Kevin, I see your hand up, but I also see you have a question here in the chat. Is ranch infrastructure eligible? Riparian fencing, livestock water facilities, livestock handling facilities, cross fencing. Those to me seem like good land improvement projects. Tim, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, the main thing is, want to make sure it's on, that the property that you'll be doing that on is one that's in conservation easement. And
yeah, we have a ranch. We're the Feather River Land Trust, so we have a ranch in the Upper Feather River, and there's an easement on it held by California Fish and Wildlife. So anyway, I just am looking for opportunities to improve the property and for the operation, but also for wildlife and other benefits. So I thought this would be a good opportunity, and I just wanted to verify that I'm thinking in the right direction.
Yep. And again, if you want to, looking at the guidelines, it goes into a little more detail there, but based on just what you're saying, it sounds like that if it's conserved land, ag land, it meets those criteria. And it's, most of these things would be looking for on land improvement. So great. Was that the main question you had, Kevin? Or was there anything else?
That was the main one. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you. And then Christina is asking, are tribes automatically considered disadvantaged communities? That's a great question. And I might ask Shauna to jump in on that one. So, but go ahead, Tim.
Oh, it is a good question. I'd certainly like to hear Shauna's thoughts, I think, in terms of the language that we're using comes from Prop 68, and those severely disadvantaged and disadvantaged community definitions come from that statute, and and then we use that tool to see it visually where those communities are located in proximity to the property. I don't know if categorically that's true, but
it's different because with CCI, I believe that it depends on the tool that we're using. So I guess it would be great to know from Shauna if she knows the underpinning statute and how that's regarded. And then if Shauna may have had, there she is, great.
So Proposition 68, as Tim mentioned, lists disadvantaged communities as populations at 80% of the statewide median income, severely disadvantaged communities at 60% of the median statewide income. So if the tribe as a community has a median income for their various members at or below that rate, then yes, but tribes are not automatically considered disadvantaged communities.
Okay, thanks. And then Mother Lode Land Trust is circling back on the community garden, noting that I think probably in this case it might be good to just reach out to us and we can have a conversation on that. I think the community garden, I mean, if it's in an urban setting, probably would not qualify at this point for CFCP. But happy to follow up and discuss that some more. Just being mindful of the time, so trying to get through these. Janae is also asking, is there a definition for large enough to support commercial agricultural operations? We have prime land, 30-acre property, and is that large enough to be competitive?
Yeah, I'd say maybe. I think it'd be kind of in your pre-proposal to kind of make that case, to us based on the property, and Shauna said based on the region. You would probably be, you're kind of the on the ground experts there, so it's kind of a matter of just making the case that it is indeed large enough, and so that's what we'd be looking to.
Yeah, and sorry, Janae, I didn't mention too, you also mentioned that the property in question is in a riparian area with close proximity to protected lands and borders the city and county of Fresno. So yeah, it'd be certainly worth talking about and seeing if that's a good fit. I mean, there's great. So Christina just mentioned that the Cal Enviro screen has been updated to include tribes under state priorities that include them as DACs. And that's why I was asking Shauna for a little more background in terms of the CFCP, because I think it is the statutory underpinnings of this are different.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the statutory underpinnings for CFCP are different than those for SALC. So SALC, we have made our Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation Program, which we also administer. We have been able to make more significant strides in making that grant friendly to tribes. CFCP, we are more limited by the statutes there. We until very recently, as Melinda mentioned earlier in the presentation, the program didn't even have tribes as eligible applicants in the statute, and we only just were able to change that with the amendment that will go into effect on January 1. So the program certainly has a long way to go on that front. But if you are a tribe or a tribal representative and are interested in our programs for agricultural land, then we're happy to engage with you with our Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation Program.
Thanks, Shauna. And Christina, yes, we realize it's, well, I've got two Christinas, but Christina Torres, we do realize that there is a lot of effort, and one of the things that we are doing is building more TA capacity out there so that we have TA providers that can help folks with doing these applications. So if it's just a TA issue, please reach out to us and we can see what we can do to help. And Seth, sorry, I think you've had your hand up for a little bit now. Go ahead.
No,
take your
thank you. And sorry, I joined late, but I did step in listening to a response on Guru Mantra Khalsa's question. I work with Guru Mantra. And I think the question is the Greenbelt area, the 4,000 acres that he mentioned, passed by voters in Riverside back in the 1970s to preserve those acres, no more than one house per 5 acres of land. And this area also is where the state's citrus park resides, and a canal that was built in the 1870s to flow water in for irrigation to serve the agricultural needs of that area is still active. And so the question becomes, do those those measures by voter rights, would those qualify as equivalent to a conservation easement?
That's a good question. I don't know if we would have an answer for you on the spot here. I think that would probably entail a little research and gathering a little bit more information from you, and to see if it satisfies that definition, that new definition in statute that talks about other conservation agreements as determined by the department's director. So we probably have to run it through that process to give you an answer rather than shooting from the hip today.
That's fine. We'll be happy to follow up with you on that. One other quick question: we are also applying under the SALT grant for a capacity building grant. Would it be too presumptuous for us to submit an application for this grant, not knowing whether we have received an award for capacity building under SALT?
No, those are two different programs. You're welcome to apply separately. I mean, but unless, is what you're saying is that you would need the capacity you would need the capacity funding in order to apply for the project, or you're just wondering if it's okay to be doing have the two different grant programs?
Well, I guess, you know, two parts. One, depending on the outcome of the Greenbelt area that we talked about, we may not need the capacity grant to move forward. However, it's the capacity grant that gives us the opportunity to go out and start to put lands into conservation easement. And even if we don't have one under easement at the time, but we're working in the process towards that, would that land be considered under this round of funding?
I'm sorry, I'm a little confused, but I mean, the capacity grants that you applied for, it doesn't conflict with an application to the CFCP program for an easement.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Not that I know of anyway, unless I'm misspeaking, Tim. I don't think so. Great. Any other questions? We're more than happy to provide, you know, to chat with you about potential projects. We realize every project is unique. So, you know, we're more than happy to kind of talk through it and see what would be a fit, what would not be a fit. Please take a look at the solicitation. There's a lot of details in there just in regard to eligibility. So that's a starting point. And then from there, you know, certainly we're happy to help. So just reach out to that CFCP at conservation.ca.gov anytime, and we're happy to help you. So unless there's any further questions, we'll let you get to lunch. We don't want to get in the way of you and your lunch. Really appreciate you all joining us today and your interest in the program. It's been great to have you there. And again, like I said, we'll be sending out a follow-up with the slides and the recording as well. I am going to stop recording.